All right, and today we have Sarah Hunt-Blackwell, who is the First Amendment policy advocate at the ACLU of Georgia, and just let somebody in. She's a former public relations professional. Sarah is also a champion of free expression with expertise in strategic communications and First Amendment litigation. As the First Amendment policy advocate, Sarah challenges state-sponsored legislation that violates First Amendment protections of speech, protest, and religious expression. She also monitors and engages First Amendment infringements across the state, expands public knowledge of First Amendment principles, and leads ACLU of Georgia's statewide First Amendment Partner Coalition. Sarah received her JD from Tulane University Law School and a BA in Communication Studies from Vanderbilt University. And today she's here speaking with us about the policy and advocacy analysis for challenged books. Take it away, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here, and I'm actually very excited to be talking to you all. I am embarrassed to say that I did not even know that this organization existed, but now that I'm aware, I'm extremely happy to be connected with you all, because I think that there are a lot of things going on within our state that we need to be having conversations about, particularly between librarians, library professionals, and the things that are going on with our young people here in Georgia. So I know that you all particularly want me to discuss book bans, which is, something that's huge. It's going on within Georgia and just around the country as a whole. But there are some other things that I kind of want to talk to you about that extend from book bans that we're seeing here in Georgia that I want to make you all aware of, and that hopefully, if you all feel so inclined, and I hope that you do, that you all can engage with us and kind of help us in our advocacy against some things that are happening down at the state capitol, actually right now, during this legislative session. So I have a presentation that I will start with, and we'll just kind of get into it from there. Sorry, I'm figuring out how to do this. Okay, do that. And then, okay. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Awesome. And if you have questions along the way, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as we go along. I'll also reserve some time at the end for questions as well. So whatever you all are most comfortable with. So educational battlegrounds, the state of content censorship in Georgia. So I like to tell people that we have, a war going on in our classrooms, and just in terms of content and materials that young people can access here in Georgia. So I'll kind of start with an overview of the First Amendment. Again, I am a First Amendment policy advocate with ACLU of Georgia, so all of my work does focus on First Amendment issues, some more than others, and censorship and book bans tend to kind of dominate a lot of my work. So just generally, the First Amendment protects our right to express ourselves, and your First Amendment rights can only be infringed by government entities. So that includes, your state governments, your local governments, and anything that is an extension of those governments. So public schools are considered government entities. Your state colleges and universities are considered government entities. Anything, again, that stems from a government agency or bureaucracy is considered a government entity, and they are supposed to abide by your First Amendment rights of the U.S. Constitution, but as well as the Georgia Constitution. Your First Amendment rights, your right to express yourself, comes in the right for assembly, which is, your protest rights, petitioning the government, press, religion, and speech. And the First Amendment often overlaps with other issues within the First Amendment, but also other issues outside of the First Amendment. So whenever you have an issue with like infringing the right to protest, that is, an infringement on your right to assembly, but a lot of times too, an infringement on your right to speech as well. And same thing like with religion, you can have an infringement of your religious rights that also overlaps with your press rights or speech rights. The First Amendment does not exist in a silo, and there are so many times that the First Amendment really does come in tandem. First Amendment infringements do come in tandem with the infringements of other rights and other issues that we all are supposed to enjoy. So particularly within the education context, speech restrictions or book bans in conjunction with education is censorship. And that is a lot, like I said, of the work that I do. So this presentation is going to focus a lot on classroom censorship because as of right now in the state of Georgia, the litigation or the legislation that has gone through pertains specifically to public schools. The Georgia legislature has not really presented a lot of bills that deal with just public library systems as a whole, but I do recognize that there are a whole plethora of issues going on within the public library systems as well, and they do tend to overlap with the school libraries. So while some of these topics might not directly impact public libraries as a whole, it all kind of stems from the same issue. So I'll start by saying, classroom censorship as a whole really is largely a local issue. Up until recently, our federal government hasn't really played a major role in what censorship looks like on the minute levels of our classrooms or our public libraries. More than anything, our local elections play more of a role in what the censorship looks like within our communities, because within those elections, that's where you elect your school board members, that's where you elect your state politicians who then, vote on the bills that impact our communities. But of course, we know that there was a transition of power earlier this year within our presidential administration. And there has been a very concerted effort within the current presidential administration to censor and, go against DEI and just the experiences of anyone who is not white or male or heterosexual. The groups that have a lot of national influence on these types of bills and on these types of issues, particularly in the South, are the Heritage Foundation, Moms for Liberty, and then specifically in Georgia, there's an organization called Frontline Policy Action that advances a lot of the censorship bills that we see at the Georgia legislature. If you Google any of these organizations, you'll see that they are ultra-conservative, and you'll see that they have ties directly to the current presidential administration and other, ultra-conservative, extreme Republican, I guess, organizations and affiliations. I will say too, the ACLU of Georgia is a nonpartisan organization. We are neither Republican nor Democrat nor independent, whatever political organizations or affiliations there are. We advance and protect civil rights, period. And civil rights as we interpret them under the United States Constitution. So it's not that we have anything against any particular political affiliation. So in these organizations being listed on this slide right here aren't that we don't have anything personally against them. These are just the organizations that we've identified as ones that are advancing legislation that restrict our rights. Censorship, and particularly classroom censorship, targets, some of our one of our most vulnerable populations, which is our young people. And from, time immemorial, we can go back in history for however many centuries and see that one of the ways to control the masses is to control the content that they engage with. And there's nothing, more easy to do than to start, I guess, at what you would probably call low-hanging fruit, where you can scapegoat minors and say, oh, well, we're trying to protect kids and we're trying to make sure that kids aren't accessing, certain types of material, or making them question their identities, or making them feel guilty about, things that happened in the past and in history. So it's easy to be able to try and put it under the guise of protecting children, when in reality, what's happening is a control or an attempt to control the masses. And we see this particularly in a phrase that's you may or may not be familiar with. Everyone says harmful to minors. So this, particularly in Georgia, is the phrase that is used. It is a phrase that is actually codified within Georgia law and defined. And it's actually a phrase that also has been defined by the United States Supreme Court as well. So material that's harmful to minors essentially is anything that, quote unquote, engages the prurient interest of young people, that doesn't have any literary, artistic, or scholastic value. That's just a loose summary of it. Because the ACLU of Georgia is partially a First Amendment organization, and we do read the First Amendment in its purest form, we don't believe in censoring. And I know that a lot of the issues that are happening right now involve misinformation, disinformation, fake news, as was a popular phrase here in the last few years. And we as an organization don't even take the position that those things shouldn't exist. From a First Amendment perspective, from the most pure, way that you can come from the First Amendment, we just believe that the only way to fight censorship is to combat misinformation, disinformation with actual factual information. And we do our best to fight censorship in all public spaces, whether that be public colleges and universities, K through 12 institutions, our public libraries. But unfortunately, the First Amendment does not extend to private schools or universities, so we don't have much weight there. But we do try to encourage private schools to just do the right thing and restrict and censor as little as possible. So I'll just kind of pause. Anyone have any questions or anything so far? Okay, don't think I see any. So, I want to go back actually. Okay, so censorship legislation in Georgia. 2022 was the big year of censorship in Georgia. So we had 3 bills that were introduced in the Georgia legislature, that passed in the Georgia legislature, all in this one year, that essentially now have become the rule of law for what content young people can access in Georgia. So you all may have heard of the Divisive Concepts Bill. This was HB 1084. This was a bill that essentially, restricted the type of instruction, the type of conversations that can happen in Georgia schools, because it outlined 9 quote unquote divisive concepts that essentially can't be discussed in Georgia schools. And I've listed them here, just to name a few: the idea that one race is superior to another, the idea that the United States is fundamentally racist, the idea that an individual's moral character is determined by their race. So the Divisive Concepts Bill is really a restriction and a censorship of being able to talk about racial topics and receive instruction about racial topics and issues within public schools. You then had SB 226, which is the book banning bill. And what this legislation does is it doesn't necessarily say, this book is banned, this book is banned, this book is banned. But what it does is it outlines the process or it actually doesn't even do that. It requires that all 180 school districts in Georgia create a process for how books can be challenged and removed within their libraries. So there's no uniformity in this bill at all. So the way that a book is challenged in Fulton County can be completely different from a way that a book is challenged in Henry County. There's, again, no uniformity to it at all. And that's one of the reasons why the bill is problematic. But, just in general, giving unilateral power to each individual school district to make very subjective guidelines about what books would be allowed in schools was problematic as well. So this bill also passed in 2022. And then lastly, you had HB 1178, which completed this trifecta, which is the Parents' Bill of Rights. And it allowed for instructional material to be removed from classrooms upon parental review. This is a bill, this is another kind of scapegoat that our legislators tend to use where, oh, parental rights. I have the right to know what my child is learning. I have the right to know what my child is reading, and, you know, being able to tell them that they can't access certain types of content, which we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. But what we do have an issue with is when, you know, the determination of what one individual child shouldn't be able to access then turns into the determination of that same determination for every single child in that school. If you don't want your child reading 1984, don't have them read 1984, but you can't make that decision for every single student at the school. So this is where we landed in 2022. And initially, we didn't really see a lot of effects from this legislation, partly because it's so broad, it's so expansive. All 180 school districts had to come up with something. Everybody was just kind of scrambling at first. But now that we're a few years out, especially last year, we've seen in 2024, we saw so much. We're seeing how these bills are starting to play out. So the effects of these bills, again, became very apparent, particularly last year and in 2023. So in 2023, we saw the removal from the Professional Standards Commission, which oversees the standards for Georgia educators. We saw the removal of all mention of DEI within training requirements and then within the curricula itself. Last summer, literally days before the school year was starting, the 2024 school year was starting, we saw an attempt to remove AP African American Studies as an elective option for students in Georgia. HB 1178 has been used to scrutinize and try to restrict sex education. And SB 226, the bill that you all are probably most interested in, as a result of that, we have seen widespread book bans across the state. And even so much so that there was the termination of an educator in Cobb County for reading a book called My Shadow is Purple to her students back in 2023. And litigation has started in that case. Book bans within schools are supposed to follow the processes that the school district has outlined. But one thing that we've noticed and that we've heard from a lot of people across the state is that schools are pulling books off the shelves, even if they haven't undergone the process that they're supposed to. Even if, you know, there's not a parent who has submitted an official challenge, even if there's, not, some type of uproar or controversy about a specific book. The schools and a lot of schools and school districts are just generally fearful of what could happen to them if parents become aware that there are certain books on the shelves. And we call these types of bans essentially soft book bans, where there hasn't been a direct affront, there hasn't been a direct challenge, but out of the fear of retaliation of what could happen, the schools are just deciding to take them off the shelves. We know that there have been a lot of educators who have pulled books out of their classroom libraries, not even like the main library for the school, but like the library that they keep within their individual classrooms. They've pulled books off of those shelves because they don't want the parents of their students to find out or for it to become an issue, and then they face termination just like the teacher in Cobb County did. So This is what we call within the First Amendment a chilling effect, because this is now chilling the ability for people to have access to books and to have access to information. It's a self-censorship that's happening out of fear of what could happen if, larger entities or parents became aware of the content that was available within books or within libraries and classrooms. This year, we have something very interesting, and this is what I am excited to talk to you all about, because this is something that if you don't already know about it, you should, because this has a direct effect, I would imagine, on most, if not all of you. There is legislation pending right now in the state legislature that removes an exemption for library employees, allowing them to face criminal liability for providing material to minors that is quote unquote harmful to minors. It literally creates a new criminal charge, and any library employee who would be charged with this crime it's a high and aggravated misdemeanor, and it's subject to a fine of up to $5,000 and or imprisonment for up to 1 year. It applies to all public libraries and all public school libraries. The only way to get out of this liability is for an employee who, quote, made a good faith attempt to identify and remove from access to minors all physical or electronic material that's harmful to minors. I've never been a librarian, but I have, from the time that I could read, I have been an avid reader. I have been a huge proponent of local libraries and of school libraries. And when I think about the sheer amount of content that is available in our libraries, I don't see how it is feasible for anyone that is employed by a library to be able to know and be familiar with the content of all physical or electronic materials that are available within the library. I don't see that happening. I could be wrong. Like I said, I've never been an employee of a library. But it just seems like, within electronic databases themselves, there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of material that people can access. So not only is this extremely concerning because of the criminal liability portion, literally subjecting library employees to jail time, it's even more outlandish to subject someone to jail time for something that they may not even be aware of. And then have the expectation that they make themselves aware of it when there are extremely, inordinate amounts of content that, could fall under this restriction. This is legislation that, again, is currently pending within our state legislature. And this bill was actually introduced last year, and it didn't go anywhere. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that public libraries were included in the bill in its form last year. It was just school libraries. But now everyone is implicated: public libraries, school libraries, everything. So we are extremely, extremely concerned about this bill. It is a high priority bill for the ACLU of Georgia. And I'm open to having conversations about what support could look like for you all and ways that you all can get involved. Do we have a question?
Yes, I do. Just curious, how is make good faith effort or attempt defined, and who's going to decide that?
Great questions. We have those same questions as well.
Okay.
And I think that what we're assuming is that the court would make that determination. So once a charge was filed and someone is in court defending against this charge, the circumstances of, the case would then be determined by either the judge or the jury about whether or not there was a good faith attempt that was made. Um,
There,
but,
there's a question in the chat. How
mhm,
will it be determined who is at fault in this case? Because there's a potentially, let's say a book was put in the library 10 years ago. Well, maybe you could have been a student at that school at that time. Oh,
exactly.
this person added that she's not a children's librarian, but she works at the circulation desk.
Right.
So,
That's also a question that we have, is how we have literally the same question, because does the charge fall on the person who actually checked the book out for someone, or does the charge fall on the person who, placed the order for the book to even be accessible in the library to begin with? We have so many questions about this, and that's part of the reason why, from a First Amendment perspective, we oppose this bill, because it's extremely vague. In addition to being vague, it's very broad. And those are your two, within the First Amendment context, those are your top two ways to get something, to sue on something on a First Amendment basis. Restrictions and censorship that are vague enough to where, someone doesn't reasonably understand, whether or not they could fall within this restriction. And then also broad enough to where it's like, but you could be. You don't know if you could be, but it's so broad that you very well could. So, these are the same questions that we're asking, and the same issues that we have with this legislation. These are great questions. And again, I feel for all library employees across the state, because, again, I'm an avid reader. I always have been, and books have opened up so many doors for me, and the ability to read and develop critical thinking, and be exposed to different perspectives and experiences really has shaped my life from the point that I was able to read. And knowing that young people may not have the same experience because of this legislation is very disheartening to me. Yes. Oh, no, no. Yes, this does implicate public universities. It does, because public universities are extensions of the government. So this would apply to libraries in public schools, K through 12, libraries in public colleges and universities across the state, and then all just regular public library branches.
so University System of Georgia schools as well.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's a lot of
Unfortunately,
people.
it is. It is. That's why I'm so happy to be connected with you all, because we're familiar with other, like, different library associations across the state, um, but I don't know how many people really understand the gravity of what could happen with this bill, and how many people are implicated um, with this bill. So it's very far reaching, and I like being able to present to you all, to organizations. But one of the things that I don't like about presenting this information to people is, like, I always feel like I'm the bearer of bad news. Like, I'm always coming with, like, okay, you should be scared because this is happening. But, at the same time, you should be scared because this is happening. And it's a real
Wait,
threat.
this is probably obvious, but I have to be sure. It's probably would that include like Georgia State's law school too?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that is a function or an extension of the state. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Georgia State's law school, UGA's law school. Um, I think even your Savannah States, Clayton, Albany, literally everything. So yeah. So that's where I hope that you all, feel empowered enough to help us and get involved, because at the ACLU of Georgia, we go to the Capitol during legislative session just about every single day. Those people know us. They see our faces all the time. They know that when they see an ACLU badge coming, that we're probably coming to complain about something or to put them on notice about something. But the faces that they don't get to see all the time are yours. They don't get to hear from you all as much as they hear from us. They expect to hear from us. They know that they're going to hear from us. But the more that they actually hear from constituents, the more that they actually hear from people who will be directly impacted by the legislation that they're passing or attempting to pass, there's no more effective advocacy than that. So, I encourage you all, again, if you feel so inclined, if you feel, courageous enough, because I also understand that there could be risk that comes with getting involved in these types of things. You don't want to face backlash from your employer. You don't want there to be any type of retaliation. We totally understand that. And we're not ever going to advocate that you do something that puts your own livelihood at risk. But if you are in a situation where you feel comfortable coming to testify in the committee where this bill is being heard, or contacting your legislator individually and sending, an email or calling their office and saying, hey, this bill is up and I'm very concerned about it because it could mean X, Y, and Z for me. There's literally nothing better than that. Or, if you don't want to do anything individually, there's always power in numbers. So there could be a collective strategy where this organization, sends a letter as a whole. So that way no one person has to be named, but you just say, hey, this letter is coming on behalf of our organization. And here are the concerns that we have with this bill. Here are the concerns that we have with censorship of books and different library materials. And you send it again with the power and strength of numbers, and there's not one individual person who has to be singled out or potentially face any backlash. And then also the easiest thing to do is spread the word. I'm sure that you all probably have are friends with or know other people who work in library systems or work in the education field. Tell them about these things. And if they, feel comfortable enough to get involved in some ways, then they can get involved. Like these are the issues that these topics have to spread like wildfire. They really do. Because the more people who know about this and the more people who can contact our representatives and our legislators and say, hey, I'm not okay with this, and neither are, these hundreds of people, that is probably going to be one of the more effective ways that we can get legislation like this stopped.
There's another question. Does harmful to children include any material that may have an R rating?
Potentially. They don't. The way that harmful to minors is defined, it doesn't include any type of rating. So it could. Really, the thing that harmful to minors hinges on is whether or not there's any type of like artistic or scholastic or educational value. So just because something is rated R, it might be determined that it has, some type of value to minors or to the community, making it not harmful. So, but then, on the flip side of that is like, it could be something that's rated R and they say this has no value whatsoever, and minors shouldn't have access to it. So the R rating or like PG-13 or whatever, that doesn't really have any determination on what could be harmful to minors. That's a really great question too.
Well, speaking of rating, because I think of movies, is that included as well? Like the media, different medias, all that's included?
Yes. Yes. So literally any content that is available through the library and the library system is subject to this. So yes, please please, if you feel so inclined, get involved. I will make sure that you will have my contact information, so that, if you do want to go and testify, or if you want to contact your legislator, or if you all are interested in sending, again, an organizational letter, happy to help you all with that and facilitate that. But we need
I,
as many people involved as possible.
but I don't know if it'd be helpful with a letter coming from the Black Caucus.
It would. It
Oh,
would.
really? Really?
It would. I understand the point there.
Yeah.
But it would, because I think that showing, again, showing the real faces and the real people behind that this legislation would affect, coming from as many places as possible, is the goal. Part of what we're doing is, here in the next week or so, we're planning to launch a campaign at the ACLU of Georgia, where we're doing I Heart My Librarian. And we're wanting people to, send us their personal stories, or personal experiences that they've had in their libraries, and say, hey, I went to my library and one of the librarians helped me apply for a job on the computer, or helped me, learn the Dewey Decimal System, or whatever, just trying to drive home the value that our librarians have in our communities. And going to show that the reasons why they don't need to be in jail,
Right.
or facing a fine up to $5,000. That's no small amount, especially in today's economy. So just trying to uplift all of our library employees, trying to uplift everyone that has anything to do with any of our public library systems. That's the goal. So if you all are interested in even, helping us with that campaign, joining in on that campaign, however you'd like to, again, I'll make sure that you have my contact information.
Yeah, I would be interested in, at our next meeting, we can definitely discuss, a letter if we want to send it out. So try to get some feedback from everybody. Because, it seems like we're always reactive. But it would be best, if we could be a little bit more proactive, ahead of the curve, instead of always fighting a bill. Let's, get our story out there before, if possible.
Absolutely. And, we also have media connections as well. So we could try to facilitate, maybe, either one of your members, or again, you all collectively as an organization, drafting an op-ed, or having an op-ed placed in the AJC, or, something like that. Our legislators do respond to media attention, especially the ones who don't like negative media. That could also be an effective strategy as well. So, whether it's a letter directly to the legislators, or if you want to go the media route, and have an op-ed placed, we can work on either one of those things that you all feel more comfortable with.
So what would a good op-ed contain? Like, would you need to have an experience where your library has been challenged or something?
We could determine what the best angle is. Our comms team is really great at, they already have established connections at the AJC. So we could just contact the op-ed editor and see what they think would be the most effective angle to go on. It could be, my library has been impacted by, X, Y, and Z, or it could be, this is what I do for my community. And again, trying to show that value. We have X amount of people come to the library every month or every day or whatever. And, just trying to show, the value that our library workers have.
Okay.
So we're open to any angle.
Okay.
Does anyone have any other questions, either about this bill or book bans or anything else? Happy to answer.
Yeah, I think it definitely want to keep in touch in case for those who couldn't attend, there may be others who have stories that they want to share or, you know, work with you or go with you, in a group. Maybe we could do that on your legislative days for
Yes,
some of them. Yeah. But we also have an advocacy division of Georgia Library Association that I think they just recently went to visit the legislature. So there's always, I mean, there's that group already, but with this affecting all of us,
yeah,
you know, potential fines and jail time, I think it couldn't hurt to have another group as well.
definitely. I just put my email address in the chat, and
Okay.
I can pin it. So I'll pin it to the top of the chat, or I guess I don't know where it pins to, but
Yeah.
please feel free to contact me.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you already have mine, but I'll put mine in here for you too.
Awesome, thank you. And
The,
I see another question. Um, does the law define a litmus test for identifying these harmful materials? So the litmus test has been determined by the United States Supreme Court already. And so that's that, what I was talking about before, where they say if the content appeals to your prurient interest and does not have any type of scholastic or artistic value. Again, very subjective, still kind of vague in my opinion, because what has value to me may not have value to someone else. Um, but that's the litmus test that the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, has put forth.
one thing we had talked about doing as a group is providing, we had discussed working with a bookstore and provide buying books as a group, as an entity of this group, buying books from this group and, finding some way to be able to make those books available to students. Is that under the same, would that follow? We're not doing it as part of our work,
Mm-hmm.
but we're doing it as part of, or even if I do it as an individual, let's say if I buy $500 worth of books to give away at a book festival
Mm-hmm.
and somebody gets it and the parent, will this bill apply under those circumstances?
That's a great question that I had not thought of. That's actually a great example, and I'm so glad that you said that because I'm probably going to. We can bring that up
Okay.
with the committee. That is a fantastic example.
Yeah. Because we're not doing it in affiliation with any library.
Right,
But,
right.
yeah, outside of that, but we just want to make some books. And probably the books that I was interested in providing would be some of the banned books, on the list of challenge books,
Mm-hmm.
just providing to different, different books for different age groups. So,
Right, for sure. I think that's a great. We're always trying to think of different scenarios where that they hadn't thought of. When they were
mhm.
drafting the bill, and I think that's one of them. Does it have to be? Does the charge or the liability come if the person is acting in their official capacity of their employer versus in their own individual capacity? That's a great
Yeah.
question.
Because I wonder if let's say if it's a book they think has some type of sexual content,
Mm-hmm.
am I then prosecuted under pornography laws, pornography
Right,
distribution? I mean, it's,
right. Yeah, yeah. Well, so even with that, the Supreme Court has made a differentiation between pornography and then material that's harmful to minors. So there is some distinction between them. Um, Now, again, material that's harmful to minors could be considered pornographic, but they don't have to like they can be mutually exclusive. That is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Any other questions from the group? Is everybody trying to see how they're going to save that $5,000?
I know. I, we're gonna do everything we can to stop this bill. And again, I'm so sorry that this is something that you all like are even having to consider and potentially face. But we're gonna do everything we can to stop this
Yeah.
bill.
Well, it's good. I mean, we need to know this. It's good to know, get the information. So,
So I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I am curious as to the criminalization, and I know that they're, I think, moving that back towards the educational portion versus being something criminal. But I'm just wondering about, and I know we hear stories within the library profession about, when they singularly point out the librarian that's accused of, this act or whatever, what type of support would the librarians also have for their from the municipalities, from their universities, from, whoever at the higher levels, instead of just letting them take the brunt of all of this legislation. It's
Right.
just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I mean it really depends. So, for example, the teacher who was fired in Cobb County, they went through the whole process of her termination, where it started at the school, it went to the local school district, and then it was escalated to the state board of education. Um, Her local board was like, "No, we don't need to fire her." The students asked for this book to be read. She read the book that they asked for. It's not, this isn't that big of an issue. But the state board of education, they were the ones that are like, no, fire her.
Mm.
So it really just depends on, the support that you do get from your organization. And we've seen specifically with public libraries, there are a few counties that we've been in touch with, and their library, their local library boards have been doing some really questionable things in terms of censorship. And they're not, those individual librarians are not really getting very much support from their library board. But we've also heard the opposite, where there are other counties where they are receiving support from their library board. So again, it just depends. And that's another thing that, is really scary, because when the stuff hits the fan, you never know how it's gonna turn out. Great questions, and I appreciate y'all's time. And again, my email address is in the chat.
okay.
And if you have any other questions, if you have any other concerns, if you want to get involved, please, please, please contact me. There are so many ways that you can get involved. We can keep you anonymous. We can, put your name out there if you're comfortable with that, where we can work with however it is that you want to do it. But we do ask that if you feel comfortable, please get involved with us.
One thing I wanted to add too, and we talked about our advocacy division.
Yes.
Every year, and we just did that recently, is that we go and we try to appease the legislators, and we give them a trinket every year, but we pay thousands of dollars for these prints. And I'm not sure you're aware of that practice that we have. And
No.
so we do go down there as different libraries, doesn't matter, we just the Georgia Library Association, and they know who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and they accept our gifts graciously, and they're really nice prints that we give them every year. So it just makes me think about, all of the things that we're doing to try to stay in the forefront of advocating for the work that we do. And, is it really being heard? Our voice is really being heard through the smaller things that we're doing, like, giving gifts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it goes back to what I was saying, where a lot of legislators justify their actions and justify these types of legislation by scapegoating kids and saying, okay, yeah, well, your gift was nice, but the kids, they're accessing all of these things and they're reading porn and they're doing, it just becomes so blown out of proportion, and construed to be something that it's not. So yes, they'll graciously accept your gifts, but they will still legislate against you.
And I guess the biggest thing is that the funding is that we still need funding. And so
Right.
that's also a way of us to so-called thank them for thinking about us too,
Right.
through the funding, because we know how they'll pull that in a minute
Right.
also.
And that's a concern that we have too, because one of the strategies that we'll deploy sometimes is if we can't get a bill killed completely, we'll try to mitigate it in some ways. And so if we harp on this, jail time, criminal liability issue, they might come back and say, okay, well, we'll take the criminal liability out of it, but we will decrease the funding of a library remove the funding of a library that has an employee that's done this. So, there's concerns on every single side of this issue. And that's why we really just want this bill to not pass and just not exist at all in any form.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Any final questions? Let me check the chat here. No. What about
Looks
that
like it was
5,000?
fun.
We like to keep it light if we can. You have to, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and actually, I'm assuming that this is, poking a little bit of fun at the situation, but that's also, if this bill were to pass, that's the type of solution-oriented thinking that we then switch into. Like, okay, people are going to be impacted by this, so how do we best support, people who could very well face this charge, face this $5,000 fine, creating a fund for them, creating, a pro bono defense for librarians who receive the charge. So, it's kind of funny to talk about it now, but it actually, if this bill were to pass, it would probably become an actual strategy. So y'all are already thinking in the right way.
Yeah, it seemed like it would be good, like you mentioned, having stories out there. If every library could, if you have a blog or a newsletter, get your patrons to submit a little story,
Yes, we're open to that too. The ACLU of Georgia has a blog that we post to consistently. That the legislators, we know that the legislators look at our blog. We know that the media looks at our blog. So if you want to submit your story and have us post it on our blog or on our social media pages, we're also open to that as well.
Okay. Well, we'd like to thank you, Sarah, for coming in and enlightening us on this latest bill and, just things that we can do going forward. So hopefully we can be more involved.
Absolutely. I hope so too. Thank you all again for your time. Thank you for your work. Again, I'm an avid reader. I love art. I love libraries. I love books. I love everything like that. So thank you all for your work. And again, if you have any questions or want to get involved, please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Yeah, I put my email in the chat for you, but I'll be in touch.
Awesome. Perfect.
All right.
Thank y'all. Have a great afternoon and great weekend.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.